Today we're starting with Psalms 55. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and hide not thyself from my supplication. The idea that he is seeing God for supplying his needs as opposed to going out and either dealing with it himself or doing without. To see God as the supplier of our needs, to see him as our refuge and our strength. Attend unto me and hear me. There is a connection between God. Sometimes people either don't know how to talk to God or don't know if they should talk to God. My heart is sore pain within me, and the terrors of death that have fallen upon me. I like the poetry here. He's going to a place that maybe a lot of us haven't been. The terrors of death. I am concerned about dying at this point, and that's a real fear. Many of us that live in Western society, we don't get that close to death. That maybe, just maybe, these guys lived closer to death than we think. That it was only, a little bit away. You could get a disease or get cut or get gangrene, or you could have an enemy. There are many ways for a person to die. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overtaken me, has overwhelmed me. These are, again, very strong motifs of fearfulness. I am full of fear. We always think that David was walking on clouds. Nothing bothered him. But here's a man, like all the rest of us, that he has fearfulness. I'm full of fear. I'm trembling. Horror has overtaken me. Oh, that I had wings like a dove, that I would fly away and be at rest. Oh, that I might wander off and remain in the wilderness. I just want to get away from it all. I would hasten my escape from the wind and the tempest. Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues. Destroy, go on the offensive for me. And this is something that he is calling us out to do, or calling the Lord out to do. And again, the word Lord here, L, big L, little O, little or, R, little O, or, little R, little d, is Adonai. Again, this is this connective, almost friendship word. It's more than a covenant word. It is an intimate connection of friendship. Day and night they go about upon the walls. Mischief and sorrow in the midst of it. Wickedness is in the midst thereof. For it was not an enemy that reproached me. He's going on to say that this was not an enemy, someone who's always been, but this was, he was by himself. This was a man acquainted, mine equal, my guide and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel and we walked in the house of God. See, he was betrayed by a friend. And many people see this as one of the scriptures that implies the rejection of Judas. And if you don't think Jesus didn't consider Judas a friend. Jesus didn't consider Judas someone close. We don't know the heart of Jesus there. Even though he knew the betrayal, he still opened the door for Judas. I'm not going to get into the whole idea of, well, could Judas have been gotten saved or not? We know Judas chose to be a thief and chose to betray. God knew he would choose it and uses that choosing for his glory. Evening and morning and at noontime I will pray and cry aloud. He has delivered my soul in peace, and from the battle that was against me. God shall hear and afflict them, even he that abideth of old. So he's going in, cast thy cares upon the Lord, and he will sustain you. And he shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. The idea, again, I'm going to share something here that, Lord here is now capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. Again, the covenant God is your sustainer. If anybody that knows the Jehovah words, we go with Jehovah Shalom, Jehovah Raphi, Jehovah Nissi, and Jehovah Jireh. God will provide. Well, there's one here. God will provide. Speaking too fast today. God will provide is Jehovah Jireh. Well, here's one here, Jehovah Cool. I looked this one up myself. The word sustain is the word cool, K-U-L, but it's also, I think of it as C-O-O-L. Jehovah is cool, Jehovah Cool. But Jehovah sustains. He is the sustainer. He is the one who will hold you up. So look at this. It's about going to God in times of trouble, especially in times of terror and times of deep betrayal, and casting that burden on the Lord. And when you cast the burden on the Lord, it becomes his burden. Now it's his responsibility, and he will do something about it. That's what we think of is when we say cast our cares upon the Lord. We act like I'll throw it up to him, but he won't do anything about it. No, you take it to him. It's his responsibility. Just like if my kids bring me something that's broken, now it's my responsibility to fix it, replace, or take care of. So we can trust God with our burdens if we will cast them to him. going to Leviticus 23. And we're going right before 22, actually, because 23 is the one that talks about the feast. 22 is a running start, where he's again consecrating the priest, that they would set themselves apart, and that they would keep themselves away from dead bodies, that they would keep themselves away from any kind of uncleanliness. We're dealing now with not just ceremonial uncleanliness, but daily uncleanliness. You got to be careful, where you're walking, how you're stepping, what happened to you. Are you around, these men also would be around their wives and stuff. Was there an accidental emission of any kind from, either party? Have you been made unclean? And when we say unclean here, we're just dealing with the daily uncleanliness that happens because we live in a world that has bacteria and that has germs and that has all these things. And we sometimes have pussy sores and all this kind of stuff, excrement and all these other things that we're still supposed to deal with. You cannot have anyone who is a leper or has a running sore become a priest. You cannot touch any creeping things. That the soul that touched any such shall be unclean until evening. Many of these also, you're not unclean forever. Some of these uncleanliness are you become unclean, you wash yourself, and you keep yourself away. You sequester yourself till the evening. So again, we need to take Leviticus as a point by point when it's talking about uncleanliness. When you talk about the different offerings that are done in different ways for different reasons. You've got laws for that are death penalties, but you also have these trespasses where it's just simple uncleanliness. And he's talking about what you would do if these things shall be unclean till evening, unless he wash with his flesh with water, and when the sun goes down, he shall be clean. So you've touched something, something's happened, you woke up and something happened, or whatever. You've had to deal with a loved one or something happened. You wash your hands you wash your hands, you clean yourself up, and you keep away till evening. This is also for when people, if they're, and this makes sense. This would keep people away from making bread and handling babies and, taking care of older people and stuff, and you're passing bacteria around. Sequestering people that are unclean, physically unclean, is what we're talking about. And you keep these ordinances. No stranger will eat of a holy thing, so no strangers can come in and eat of this. And it says if the priest buy a soul, again, we're talking not about buying souls. Again, in here, we're not talking about buying people like off a rack, or when you think of the 1700s with the slave trades of America, in the 17 and 1800s. We're talking about people who want to work for you, because in a sense, corporations buy people. I want you to work for me, and here's what you're going to do. Here's what your responsibilities will be, and here's what I'm going to pay. If that transaction works out, they just bought us. They bought 40 hours of our lives, so they bought, more than 40 if you're a salary worker. So you get the idea. We're not talking about slavery in, a European sense. I mean, people had slaves like that. They had slaves that were dominated, that were taken, they talked about man stealers. If you look back at Joseph, he became a slave. He was not had any rights. There was no covenant between him and anyone who owned him. You would just work till you die, and you'll do exactly what I say the way I say it. Here it's different. But if you have a soul with money, he shall eat of it, and he that is born of his house. So if you do have someone that you hire to come in, they can eat of it, because the food from the temple was for the sustenance of the priest and his household. It talks about the priest's daughters, if it's widowed or divorced and have no child, these things. But a man may not eat of, if a man eats these things unwittingly, then there's something here for that. It talks about taking blemished animals. I won't go too far into that. It's pretty simple, but do read through it. Talking about how do not bring the blemished animals. Don't bring the sickly animals. Don't bring the least, don't bring your best. Bring the first. Bring, if it's sickly and it's the first, you break its neck and bring the next one. You redeem it with the next one. It's very important that you offer this. And this is talking about in a peace offering. you shall offer at your own will. So again, the idea of free will. The words free will are all over the Torah. I have yet to come across anything about chosen. You are chosen to do this. They are a chosen people, but that's different. I picked you out of the nations. I've grown you. I brought you up from Abraham, from one man, and from Sarah, from one woman, and I've built this. This is what God has been doing. So he is a part of that. That's the choosing that God continues to work with his promises. His choosing are not just plucking plucking you out and making you do this and doing that. It's a continual outflow of God working with his promises through people, through times of good and through times of increased sin. But he wants a free will offering here. Offer it at your own will. And when you bring this, neither shall a man's hand, a stranger's hand, shall you offer the bread of your Lord to any of these, because of the corruption is in them. Again, a stranger is going to have filthy hands. This isn't just a matter of, well, strangers are bad. No, they're going to have filthy hands. God wants a clean offering, and Christ will be that clean offering. And much of our worship, we need to make sure that it's clean. Sometimes we throw whatever songs we want, or we kind of interpret the Bible any way we want. We're very sloppy about our worship of Christ when we should be very precise. He was precise with us. We need to make sure that we're precise. When you're going into the feast, here he talks about the feast. And there are different ones, of course. You have the regular Sabbath, but he also talks about the Passover, which is the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then on the first day of the week is first fruits. So again, Passover can float anywhere in the previous week. It could be on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday. It could be anywhere, but the first day after Sabbath is first fruits. So there's difference. You got one of them that floats wherever the 14th was. That's where you'll find Passover, and then it'll last for 7 days till the 21st. And in the middle of that, you will have first fruits. And again, Passover is about the Passover lamb. First fruits is about taking out of leaven. The unleavened bread is the taking out of leaven, the taking out of sin. First fruits is like offering a sheave offering. And again, it's a wave offering to the Lord. And who was our wave offering? Jesus is the wave offering. He went up. So the idea of when the priests lift their hands up and then bring their hands down, Jesus went up, and one day he will come down. And so it's lived right there in this motif. He'll go on and talk about 50 days after first fruits will be one called Pentecost. And they celebrate that there. And many people believe, I can't find the biblical evidence, but I'll go with it as an implication, that is also the day that they got the law from Mount Sinai. We do know in the New Testament that is the day that the Spirit came down on the believers, that was created what we know as the spiritual church. But he goes into this, and he talks about what to do and what you're not to do. You can do work, you just don't do servile work. You don't do work to make money. You're not out there having people working. Now, if you have to make food, or if you have to do this, if you have to light fires to feed kids and all this stuff, you're expected, but you do not do any servile work. You're trusting God. And it talks about making the new meat offerings and the different things. It talks about they do, the priests do work in doing the meat offerings and the drink offerings during this time. So the priests are working and the people are not. And who is our high priest? Jesus Christ. He's working. He's sitting there at the right hand of the Father. He's not sitting down in so much that he's not active. There are things that he's doing. He is participating. He is ruling right now in heaven, and when he will come and rule on earth. He has asked us to be ambassadors till then. So we see these lining up these feast days, and there's supposed to be 7 of them other than your Sabbath, that one day a week where you don't work. You'll have 3 of them in the spring. You'll have one kind of in the middle right before summer, and then you'll have 3 of them in the fall. And so you have, Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits are in the spring. Then you had Pentecost, which is 50 days after first fruits. Then you come across your fall feast, which begin with trumpets. This is known as the Jewish New Year. They would sound trumpets. Day of Atonement, which is 10 days later, and then you had Tabernacles, where they would go and live in booths. These are also very important. He talks about here in the 15th, it talks about here that the Lord said, "Speak to the children of Israel, in the 7th month, in the 1st day of the month, you shall blow a memorial of blowing of trumpets." This is the Feast of Trumpets, and you'll do no servile work. So this is you're blowing trumpets, you're starting over, you're getting attention. You do no servile work. But you shall make an offering by fire unto the Lord. On the 10th day of the month, you shall have a holy convocation, you'll afflict your souls. This is the day of afflicting, of mourning, of atonement. We're sorry, and showing God that you're sorrowful for your sins. You've already had sins forgiven, but we always have this sense of atoning and attuning with God. So that's what atonement is. We do need to participate in admitting our sins, admitting where we've been wrong, and admitting that He is right. This is something that we have to, this is also glorifying God. It's when we say, you are right. You are right to call us down. You are right in how you do it. You are right in the standards that you've put out. And so you'll do that. You'll do no servile work. And whatever soul shall not be afflicted on the day, he shall be cut off. So everyone carries this kind of mournful, stoic solemnity. This isn't just about, maybe it might have some weeping involved. Sometimes we forget how sinful we really are. We forget how dirty we can become. We forget how evil we can become. And we do need that sense of point of view, of perspective here. You'll do no manner of work. And then he says on the 15th day, this is Feast of Tabernacles, when people would move out of their houses and they would go sit in booths. They would make these little tents to live in. And so they would do this to remind them that you were once slaves, to remind them that you once did not own property, to remind them that you were once strangers and sojourners, that you were once bondsmen, and you went from bondage to here. Many of us forget to look back after a day of awe and see what God has done from where we came to where we are. And maybe we're not where we want to be, but we lose perspective when we forget about where we've come and what we had when we started, which was close to nothing. And God has built, maybe it hasn't met our expectations, but then who are we? Do we have food? Do we have raiment? Do we have, are we warm? Are we cool? Do we have transportation? What these people had, God gave them. They didn't start from scratch. God built with them and for them, and God will build with and for us. And that's what people are learning here. There's times when I think the church needs to start over. You need to go back and be in awe. You need to stop and have some perspective. And then you need to focus on what God has done, especially in the last year. This would be a yearly thing where even you stopped in the last year to focus on how God is blessed by following His rules. And this will create a humility. Many times pride will puff up on, look what I've done for me. But this is national humility where people were living in booths. There was a time when the powerful and the powerless, before they came into the promised land, the powerful and the powerless all ate the same. They all dressed the same. They all kind of lived in the same kind of booths. They lived in the same kind of houses, when you're living in tents. There was no social structure, of hierarchy in the wilderness. No matter if someone had more power than another person, even as a slave, maybe some of them were in the chamberlains, maybe some of them were a little higher up the social structure than the ones that went and made the bricks or worked out in the fields. You're all the same in the wilderness. And so to remind them, I think these remembrances are very important. And on the 15th day, you shall gather the fruit of the land. You'll keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. On the 1st day shall be a Sabbath. On the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. So you have your Sabbath set up. And you will take of you the best of the goodly trees and the branches and the willows, and you'll rejoice before the Lord. And you'll keep this feast unto God 7 days, and it shall be a statute. And you'll dress in booths 7 days, all the Israelites that lived in booths. This is so your generations may know that I made children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And remember, every time he says, I am Yahweh Elohim, there's a point to where this is almost like I said, circle that portion in red. This is one of the reasons why. This is why when it's really an important thing. He's not just saying this to, be full of himself, but he's also saying this as a point of remember, this is what I've done for you. This is what where you've come from. I think pride comes in when we forget where we've come from. Pride comes in when we look past at the last year and say, look what I did. Or, sin comes in when we look at the last year and say, look what I didn't get. So look at the feast as a point of perspective. Look at them for what they're saying. Let's not just pass them off as this is another chapter to read. That we actually dig in a little bit and scratch the surface. I didn't really try to go point by point on that about what they did and didn't do because I was trying, this whole scriptures that I'm doing here are meant to be an overview. They're not meant to touch every point. They're not meant to take you line by line and verse by verse. They're meant to give you an overview, kind of going over it real fast. But sometimes I think also we go too slow, 3 verses at a time and pull it all apart. Remember, irreducible complexity. If you take this apart too much, you can't see what it's saying. Some people will go all the way down. If you take something apart, it can't work like it's supposed to. But if you build it up too much, you make it too complex and it can't do what it's supposed to do. I think there's a proper timbering, a proper understanding of this word that needs to be looked at to where we're looking at correctly. And I do like the evidentiary grid work. It's laid down in front of you and you just read what's there. And then when you're done with the whole Bible, you go back and you just do the same thing again. And you'll see different patterns. You'll see different connections. And the more times you do that, the more you'll have stronger understanding. And I think that's important. Thank you.